Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. International Sanatana Dharma Society Jayate. Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam Shri Vishnu Shri Vishnu Shri Vishnu Namaste, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here again with us for our weekly satsanga. We do this every Monday at the same time at 7 p.m. Central Time. And this is the online satsanga of the International Sanatana Dharma Society. The International Sanatana Dharma Society, or ISDS, is a nonprofit religious movement that is dedicated to restoring Dharma throughout the entire length and breadth of this earth, and possibly extending beyond Earth. But at least we'll start with this planet. Thank you again for being here very much. Before we dive into our talk for today, just a few very quick announcements that I want to make. Some very exciting announcements, actually. The first of which is that we now have a video channel on Odyssey, on odyssey.com. And Odyssey is, as I've seen, a very, very good website. It's a very, very good platform for hosting videos. So indeed, we have our own channel on there now, and it's simply called Sanatana Dharma, the Sanatana Dharma channel. And that's Sanatana Dharma, one word, capital S, capital D. And we have several videos on there as of right now. But again, it's brand new, so we've just launched it. So when you have a chance, please visit there. Hopefully someone will have the URL available, and we'll put that in the chat. And again, when you have a chance, please visit our Odyssey channel and subscribe when you can. As is the case with all of these platforms, our goal is to have as many individuals active on all of these social media platforms as possible. So again, please join there. And the latest video that we put on there actually is our video on the way of the brahmachari. You know, we released this video first on BitChute. If you go to BitChute to our channel there, you'll see this video on there. Now it's on Odyssey. And later this week, we will release the same video on YouTube on this Dharma Nation channel as well. So that's the first thing that I wanted to tell people. The second thing is extremely exciting, actually, just as exciting as now having the Odyssey channel. And that is that our latest book, The Introduction to Sanatana Dharma, is now available in Kindle form. So is now finally available as an ebook. So this is something that is very exciting. And to find that, of course, all that you do is you just go to the normal page on Amazon of the Introduction to Sanatana Dharma, and now you'll have the option to get either the print version or the Kindle version. And we've made both extremely affordable. And Again, please feel free to go there, take a look at that. For those individuals who have wanted a digital version of the book, a Kindle version of the book, that is now available. And hopefully this will be the very first, just the very first of all of our books eventually becoming available on Kindle as well. So again, very exciting news. The other thing that I want to mention is, as always, we have a Discord server that is a forum on Discord that is dedicated to the International Sanatana Dharma Society and how we teach Sanatana Dharma, i.e. authentically and for real. So if you would like to join that forum, again, as always, someone I'm sure will put the link, the URL in the chat. And this is a forum not for general discussion, not just for anyone, not for people who want to come very egotistically and try to teach us about Sanatana Dharma or have debates, etc., etc., etc. As I always tell people, it is for one purpose. If you are a sincere individual who has the sincerity, the patience, the humility to learn about Sanatana Dharma specifically, not all religions, not any religion, not any topic upon the face of the earth. This server is dedicated exclusively to the religious path known as Sanatana Dharma. If you would like to learn more, if you would like to ask questions of our students who are on there, many hundreds of them, if you would like to have fellowship, that is, just have people who are there who you can talk to, who you can share with, who can inspire you, etc., please feel free to join our Discord server. The last thing that I want to say, and I believe I announced this the last time, we are now on Telegram as well. And our Telegram channel has grown tremendously. This is only a few weeks old, and already we have many, many, many hundreds of individuals who are on there. And again, someone will put the URL in the chat. Otherwise, if you want the URL to many of these things that I've mentioned, also feel free to go to the description of this video, because in there we have, I don't believe we have everything, but we have quite a few links to all of our social media presence. So feel free to follow those links. So with that, the very last thing that I'm going to say, and that is this, that I don't do this often enough. I always thank all of you, the viewers, the audience, for being here every week. But I also like to thank the moderators as well, because we have a moderation team that is like none other. They are experts bar none. They are wonderful individuals who know what they're doing, and I never can thank them enough for all of the wonderful work that they do here behind the scenes. We have more moderators than you know and more than you see, actually. We have many, many individuals who work very hard to keep this a very safe, wonderful, happy, healthy place. And I want to thank all of our moderators for all of the hard work that I know you do. So with that, again, I thank you all. And now let us proceed with our talk. The talk that we're going to be giving today is somewhat unique. And it is actually unfortunate that it is to be considered somewhat unique. This is a talk that would be unique in the modern context, that is post-60s modernity, in which the idea of thought, the idea of discursive thought, the idea of using one's intellectual faculties is frowned upon by many, many individuals today. And where the idea is that if one wants to arrive at truth, one uses a type of abhitapa pramana. That's a term I just made up now. Abhitapa pramana. Pramana means a way of knowing, and then abhitapa means emotions. So interestingly, the primary way in which individuals try to approach the truth of any given topic or situation in their lives today is, how does it feel? Emotions, emotions, emotions. Rather than using logic, rather than using reasoning, rather than trying to take an objective perspective on whatever is the topic at hand, the situation at hand, whether it's something in one's personal life, whether it's something political, whether it's something religious, whether it's something philosophical, etc. The idea of using one's discriminative discernment, which is what should be used in order to arrive at truth, is something that is today amazingly frowned upon by many individuals. Now, many individuals won't say that because they don't want to seem stupid. They won't say that, but they do that nonetheless. In other words, they use their emotions to make decisions. Well, this is a very unfortunate thing that, contrary to what many, many people may think, this is extremely recent. When I say extremely recent, I'm talking about especially, in the past 50 years or so. Again, since roughly the 1960s, where emotion overtook reason, overtook intelligence, etc. And now the idea of using one's discrimination, one's discernment, one's intelligence, one's innate logical faculties in order to arrive at a conclusive truth, this is something that has become a lost art, unfortunately. Well, interestingly, the idea of discriminative discernment is something that is indeed central to Vedic philosophy. And even that, sadly, may surprise some people who have more of a New Age understanding of even Vedic philosophy, where even some people who think they know Vedic philosophy think that Vedic, or let's say the Vedic tradition, is non-philosophical and all touchy-feely. No, that simply is not the case, actually. Philosophy, discernment, using one's intellectual faculties, etc., is foundational to every single aspect of Sanatana Dharma and specifically the yoga system. Now, interestingly, when people today think about yoga, of course, what do they tend to think about? Well, they tend to think about the Hollywood version of yoga, which is quite literally the mirror opposite of what is true yoga. If you have watched any of these documentaries about so-called yoga that have appeared on Netflix or Amazon, these very slick Hollywood-produced documentaries about yoga, I can guarantee you, having watched any one of these documentaries, at the end, you will have learned nothing about yoga. Because again, the stereotypes that are presented about yoga by Hollywood, by New Age, the New Age crowd, etc., is quite literally the very opposite of what yoga actually is. Yoga is a philosophy of spiritual practice. Yoga primarily is indeed a philosophy. Indeed, it's recognized in the Vedic system as what is called one of the Shad Darshanas. That is one of the 6 philosophical schools of thought. So traditionally, for thousands of years, yoga has been considered, in the tradition of Sanatana Dharma, a philosophical school, a school of philosophy. But what makes it different from other philosophical systems is that it is a philosophy of spiritual practice. So, interestingly, what the yoga philosophy presents is an integration, a balance of, on the one hand, intellectual philosophy, but then spiritual practice on the other hand. Both of these combined very nicely. There's one video where I was interviewed in 2006, where I talk about balancing these two, balancing on the one hand philosophy, intellectualism, with bhakti, very specifically, on the other. Well, in the same way, philosophy and spiritual practice, that is sadhana, have to also be balanced in such a way that they are supportive of one another. So thus, when we speak of yoga, what we're talking about is, again, not just asanas, not just the idea of doing a headstand, not walking around town carrying a yoga mat under your arm. No, what we're talking about is a philosophy of spiritual practice that is designed to give us liberation. This is indeed the nature of the school of yoga. Indeed, it has been recognized since time immemorial throughout the yoga system, throughout Sanatana Dharma, and really in any ancient philosophical or religious school of thought, that it is not possible to even practice spirituality without that philosophical foundation. The reason why this is the case is because what does it mean to practice anything if you don't know why you're practicing it? You see, to practice, just those 2 words alone, these 2 words mean something. They mean, these 2 words mean to exert yourself in such a way that you are doing hard work to achieve a goal. That's practice. If you practice anything, you're trying to achieve a goal. If you're practicing martial arts, violin, any musical instrument, etc., etc., etc. What does it mean to practice something which will be hard without knowing why you're doing it, without having a goal, without understanding the theory behind it, etc., etc.? So thus, philosophy, that is intellectual discernment and using one's wisdom faculty in order to discern what is true from what is false, is foundational to all spirituality. So thus, what yoga tries to bring about is an integration, a complete integration between philosophical knowledge and spiritual practice. Now, all this being said, what is the ultimate goal of yoga? Many of us know this. Indeed, what does the word yoga itself even mean? Well, the word yoga, of course, comes from the Sanskrit verb root yuj, meaning to bring together, to yoke, to bind, to unite. So the way I translate the word yoga is as union. And we know that this is ultimately the goal of yoga, is this union. This is the ultimate goal. And this being the case, that the goal is union, what precisely does this idea of union mean? Well, of course, when we speak about the idea of union, what we mean, of course, is not a literal merging of ourselves with the divine. Indeed, this is not a possibility. But rather what is meant by union is union of intent, union in love. This is what is meant by union. So the idea that even within union, the truth of the matter is we cannot even have the idea of union without that distinction being there of ourselves as the perceiver, God as that which is perceived. Now, all this being said, this is all by way of preface. Now, I'm going to be commenting on 3 very specific verses from the Yoga Sutras, very specifically. And these 3 verses talk about the idea of intellectual discrimination. So if you want to follow along with these verses, as always, please just refer to the description of this video and you'll see where these verses are and you can follow along. Again, all 3 of these verses are from the Yoga Sutras because, again, we're talking about discriminative discernment within the yoga system. So let's begin with first chapter 2, verse or sutra 26 from the Yoga Sutras. And this sutra proceeds as follows. The continuous practice of discrimination is the means for attaining liberation. So again, Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras here makes this very, very clear that discrimination, that is being able to use one's intellectual discernment in order to know truth, this is something that is crucial if one indeed wishes to achieve the goal of yoga, which is indeed liberation. So this is what this is saying, the continuous practice of discrimination, intellectual discrimination. So by continuous practice, of course, what is pointed to are several things. First of all, the idea that indeed this is something that is important. This is something that we don't simply use as some tool and then throw the tool away in a very quick sort of way, but on the contrary, discrimination is something that is of great importance, and it is something that is meant to be practiced throughout the totality of our practice in yoga. So thus the continuous practice of this intellectual discrimination. So thus all throughout our sadhana life, all throughout our life, as we are practicing yoga, as we are practicing sadhana, as we are practicing meditation with this aim of liberation, we are practicing this discrimination. Now, interestingly, this idea of discernment is something that we indeed are meant to do all throughout our life in order to achieve liberation. But more than this, it is a tool that we do not leave behind even upon liberation. Now, getting back to what I was saying before in my preface about the idea of yoga as union, that is yoga bringing about ultimately the coming together of ourselves and God in perfect, loving, reciprocal, devotional relationship. That is achieving that perfect samadhi, that perfect absorption of our awareness upon God. When we achieve this, interestingly, even upon union, necessarily there has to be this distinction that is there. And I've given this example many, many times. Again, unfortunately, many Advaitins, for example, will have this false idea that, upon liberation, we quite literally become God. We merge into God. It's the idea of, you take a drop of water and you drop it into the ocean, and the drop simply disappears into the ocean itself. Well, this is not what Sanatana Dharma teaches. Rather, what it teaches is indeed the idea of samadhi. That is the idea of absorption of one's awareness upon God. But at the same time, distinction is still there. That is, we are still a distinct being. We still are ourselves. We don't literally lose ourselves. Think about this. I've actually heard this terminology from some Advaitins, where they will say, oh, you lose yourself in Brahman. You literally, there's a loss of self. That's not the goal of liberation. This is not anyone's goal. Indeed, to even hear those words necessarily would scare a lot of people away, because we don't want to lose ourselves. The goal of spirituality is rather to find ourselves, not to lose ourselves. And it is when we have this union with the divine, this union with God, that indeed we fully understand ourselves as beings who are, on the one hand, indeed united with God in the very essence of who we are, but at the same time being always, eternally, a distinct being. So again, that distinctness has to always be there. Philosophically, we have to use the idea of distinctness in order to understand any sort of philosophical category of understanding, but also psychologically, also phenomenologically. Even upon liberation, there has to be that sense of, yes, union, but also with distinctiveness. Thus, this is why the greatest of all philosophical systems in Sanatana Dharma is known as Vishishta Advaita. Vishishta Advaita. That is non-duality with qualitative and attributive distinction. So thus, we have this idea of indeed non-duality, meaning that ultimately all that there is God, but also with distinction, also with attributes, also with discernible qualities that are there within God, of which we also are a distinct qualitative attribute of the divine. So thus distinction has to always be there. And without distinction, there can be no discrimination, there can be no discernment, there can be no philosophical thought whatsoever, there can be no truth. And that is the ultimate point, is that it is indeed in distinction, in being able to separate truth from non-truth, that we can then arrive at truth. Otherwise, if the two are jumbled, well, that's where we are now. That is our intellectual, psychological, spiritual predicament at the moment. We cannot discern, most of us, truth from untruth. Some of us can to some degree, to varying degrees, some more, some less. Obviously, a person would not be able to even function in this world unless they could make some distinction between what is real and what is not real. Otherwise, again, a person would not even be able to survive in this world in any way. So again, there is some little bit of a grasp of the distinction between truth and non-truth among all beings. But the ultimate goal is to come to that point of complete distinction between that which is real, that which is illusory, to reject the illusory and to accept the real. So thus, this is the meaning of life in Sanatana Dharma. It is only by perceiving such differences, disjunctive syllogisms, etc., using logic, categories of logic, etc., that we have the ability to grasp truth. Indeed, for individuals who are not capable, who are incapable of discriminative discernment, such individuals have lost the ability to gain truth. So thus, for individuals who, again, you find this in the New Age quarters especially, who try to talk about how, ultimately truth is irrational. Ultimately, spirituality is something where you are rejecting the rational altogether, and you're going into a different zone that might seem crazy to some people, etc., etc. But that rationality, using wisdom, using philosophy, using the intellect, etc., are ultimately meaningless. No, that simply is not the case. That is not the case. The only way that we can perceive truth is indeed by perceiving distinctions, by using the mental faculties, the logical faculties of, again, disjunctive syllogisms, of logic, etc., to mathematical precision, that we can then understand what is truth. One other thing I want to say before I go on to the next section is that, again, in accordance with what some Advaitins and some Neo-Advaitins and some New Age sort of individuals will try to claim, distinction is not a form of duality. Sometimes some of these individuals will try to say that, oh, if you make any sort of distinction, if you make any sort of distinction between truth and untruth, between left and right, between this and that, etc., you're simply engaging in duality. And this simply is not the case in accordance with Sanatana Dharma. Rather, distinction is not a form of duality. Rather, what distinction is an awareness of hierarchical and disjunctive qualitative multifariousness. In other words, the ability to see things, individual existence, for what they are and what they are in relation to each other, and more, the qualitative essence of each. And understanding all that, to then embrace that which is of the nature of truth and to reject that which is of the nature of untruth. That is what it means to have this discriminative discernment. It's not a form of duality. On the contrary, it is nature. It is of the nature of Dharma. Now, all this being said, looking at this idea of, again, the idea of, on the one hand, union, but on the other hand, the idea that we also eternally have to have this sense of distinctiveness if our existence, even upon liberation, is going to have any meaning, I want to look at a verse from Bhagavad Gita very, very briefly, before we then go on to more verses from Yoga Sutras. This is a very famous verse from Bhagavad Gita. This is chapter 5, verse 18, in which Krishna says, "The truly learned persons, with the eyes of divine knowledge, see with even vision a Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and an outcast," or a dog eater. This is literally how this is translated, a dog eater, but meaning someone who is an outcast. So interestingly, a lot of people look at this verse without fully understanding exactly what it is saying. This is a verse in which a distinction is made, where on the one hand, when one looks at the inner being of any existent living entity, what we see is indeed, again, that unity, that all living beings are Atman. At the same time, however, what is important is that that distinction is yet recognized. That distinction is still there. You see, you understand that all these various beings of all these various species, ultimately within, they're all Atman. But at the same time, you make this distinction that one is a cow, one is a dog, one is a Brahmana, that is a sage of some sort, etc., etc., etc. For that matter, you can go on. One is a tree, one is a cat, one is and you can go on for 8,400,000 species of life. Now, the thing that is interesting is this distinction is indeed necessary. It is necessary to, on the one hand, ontologically understand that spiritually these beings are, in a way, all the same in that they all ultimately are Atman, while at the same time, empirically, distinction must be there. And to simply say that, oh, the fact that they are all Atman, that means that then the empirical distinctions are meaningless, that's simply not true. There is no sage, there is no person alive or ever, hopefully, as you'll see in a moment, you'll see why I said hopefully. There is no being who can quite literally not make the distinction and live in such a way where they don't make the distinction between these various species. Otherwise, you would marry the cow. Otherwise, you would marry the dog. Otherwise, you would eat the Brahmana. But we don't, do we? Again, as I said a moment ago, I hope we don't. I hope you don't. I hope you're not going to marry a dog. Sadly, I know that today, in our day and age, some people indeed do marry dogs and dolphins, etc., etc. But that's a different story for a different talk that we'll give maybe in the future. But no, we understand these distinctions. We understand that the distinctions are real. They are real in the empirical sense, and indeed, without recognizing the distinctions that are there, both empirically, but then by extension, philosophically, we cannot make sense of reality, and indeed, we will live a life that is meaningless, and that is insane, that is crazy, that is the opposite of liberation. You see, the opposite of what it means to be liberated is to be a slave of illusion. Another term for that is craziness, insanity. All right, all that being said, And I know that I'm throwing a lot at people. Trust me, I could throw a lot more at people, actually. I'm trying to actually present this talk in as brief a way as possible and not throwing too much at people, because when it comes to the idea philosophically, when it comes to the idea of speaking in terms of nyaya, of Vedic logic, Vedic logistics, etc., the truth of the matter is we could go extremely deeply into this, but I'm presenting just a very surface level, brief introduction to the idea of discriminative discernment within the yoga system. Let's go on now to the very next verse that we're going to look at from the Yoga Sutras. And this is chapter 2, or pada 2, and sutra 28. And Patanjali says, by the practice of the limbs of yoga, the impurities dwindle away, and there dawns the light of wisdom, leading to discriminative discernment. So again, this is Patanjali. Now, several things to be said about this verse that are quite important. First of all, by the practice of the limbs of yoga. Let's stop there. What Patanjali is speaking about here is, all right, we understand that this discriminative discernment is crucial if one wishes to make serious spiritual progress. Again, for those out there in the audience who you are yoga teachers, you have performed yoga, you have practiced yoga, etc., etc., you have read something about yoga, you understand that Patanjali is not just anyone. He is one of the most important philosophers in the entire history of yoga. His Yoga Sutras is one of the very foundations of, indeed, the yoga system. So we have to take what he's saying here very, very seriously. In the first verse that we looked at, he explains that, indeed, if you wish to be a yogi, a serious yogi, again, not a pretend Hollywood yogi, not a Beverly Hills yogi, but if you want to be a real yogi, that is an individual who wishes to, with fidelity, with humility, with sincerity, with integrity, follow the yoga philosophy to its ultimate goal of self-realization and God consciousness. If this is your goal, then indeed you need to follow this path of discriminative discernment, of discrimination. But now Patanjali explains, all right, how do we attain this? How do we attain this discriminative discernment, as he calls it? By the practice of the 8 limbs, by the practice of Ashtanga, of the Ashtanga system. Several other things to be said about this before I go on. When one does this, when one does indeed follow the 8 limbs of yoga, and very quickly, just for those who are not fully aware of what these 8 limbs are, and I've talked about this in the past, I'm not going to go very deeply into this, but very simply, yama and niyama, that is the ethical system of yoga. Asana, and that is the actual physical aspect of yoga, doing the actual asanas or postures of yoga. Pranayama, that is breath retention, breathing exercises. Pratyahara, and that is withdrawal of the senses. Dharana, concentration, building intense focus. Dhyana, or meditation proper. And then finally, samadhi. Samadhi being, again, one-pointed absorption of one's awareness upon the divine, upon God. So when Patanjali here talks about the 8-fold yoga system, he's talking about following these 8 limbs, these 8 limbs of yoga that I just explained to people. When one does indeed follow the yoga system as taught by Patanjali and by authentic yoga teachers who are alive today, of which there are only a handful, very sadly, but when you do indeed follow the actual yoga system, according to Patanjali, this is what happens. The impurities dwindle away. That's the first thing. He states this both in the negative and in the positive, which is how you need to state it. The via negativa and the via positiva. What happens when we practice yoga in a very authentic, very legitimate sort of way is that all of our impurities, that is, what is meant by impurities? Anything within us that we don't want and that should not be there. Anything deep within our psyche that is there, that should not be there. For that matter, even physically, even toxins that are there within the physical body, anything that is indeed an impurity. That means fear, that means anger, that means any sort of envy, lust, etc., greed, any sort of negative sort of impurity that we may have within us. These begin to dwindle away. These begin to quite literally disappear from our inner framework. And then conversely, what also happens, he says here, and there dawns the light of wisdom. So now the very opposite of the dwindling away of the negative, now there is the positive that arises, and that is that there is a dawning of this light of wisdom, of Buddhi, of this wisdom that is there within us. So as a result of practicing yoga, we indeed begin to acquire wisdom. And now, having done these steps, according to Patanjali, this leads to discriminative discernment. So interestingly, discriminative discernment is one of the byproducts of these various steps that Patanjali speaks about here. So discriminative discernment is something that all throughout our sadhana life we should be cultivating, doing our best to practice, etc., etc. But interestingly, in the very beginning, such discriminative discernment is in itself not brought to its complete perfection just yet. And why? Because we're still very flawed people. Because we may think that we're using our discernment. We may think that we're thinking philosophically. We may think that we are acquiring wisdom, but we can still make mistakes. We can still have the ahankara, the false ego that is operative. Well, by practicing the eightfold yoga system, the 8 limbs of yoga, by ridding ourselves of impurities, by having the light of true wisdom begin to dawn within us, what then happens is now we have the ability to use this discriminative discernment perfectly, like a sharp sword. Perfectly, without flaw. So this is what Patanjali is saying here. Intellectual philosophy, interestingly, leads to practice. Intellectual philosophy, that's the foundation of everything. This then leads to practice. So what Patanjali was saying, the eightfold yoga system, etc., the purification of oneself, the dawning of wisdom. And such practice then leads to the activation of the wisdom faculty, Buddhi. And this is what Patanjali is saying here. This discriminative discernment in this particular case is pointing to Buddhi, that is wisdom faculty as a very attribute of our very atman itself. Very good. So all that being said, let's look at the very last verse that we're going to be looking at from Yoga Sutras. And this is from chapter 4 or pada 4 and sutra 25. And here Patanjali says, for one who can discriminate between the mind and the true self, the misperception of the mind as atman ceases. So this is a very, very nice verse in which, again, Patanjali is talking about the idea of discrimination, and how this is a positive thing. Let me say this now, actually. Philosophical, intellectual discrimination is good. This is a sort of discrimination that people used to, if not have, at least want, at least try to cultivate, at least recognize the value of in the past. Now, sadly, people have lost this sense of value of discrimination. But yes, we indeed want to have philosophical discrimination. And Patanjali explains here that for one who can discriminate, and specifically, he is very specific here, between chitta, mind substance, and atman, or drashtura, to use his terminology, true self. For that individual, the misperception, that is the illusion, the mistake, that the mind is atman, that ceases. In other words, it is indeed through discriminative discernment that we now have the ability to know our true self. And this is the primary goal for the Yoga Sutras, very specifically, is knowing oneself, atma-jnana, of self-realization. So Patanjali explains here that, again, it is crucial to have such discrimination if we are going to meet the end goal of atma-jnana, of self-realization, self-knowledge, without which we don't have that ability to indeed discriminate, to discern, to see the distinction between that which is illusion, that is, that which we mistakenly think is ourself, i.e. mind substance. That means intellect, that means mind, that means emotions, that means false ego, etc., etc. All of that on the one hand versus that which is true self, our true self, atman. Without this sword of discrimination, we cannot know our true selves. Without that sword of discrimination, we are forever lost. And we are forever trapped in that fog of mixture of truth and untruth, real and unreal. And some of us want to know the distinction, some of us don't. But in any case, we find ourselves floating in this confused world of not having the ability to separate truth from untruth, to see these distinctions, and to reject that which is untrue, to embrace fully that which is true. So thus, this is indeed, maybe to the surprise of even some individuals who think that they understood the Yoga Sutras, this is one of the foundations of the yoga system: discrimination, discernment, distinction, being able to think in terms of philosophical categories, etc., without which, again, we do not have the ability to re-access our Buddhi, our wisdom faculty, and thus discern that which is true from that which is untrue, and thus know our true self in its ultimate purity. Very good. So with that, I'm going to stop here. I know that I threw quite a bit at people. Again, this is something that really I could have done in a 3-hour talk and gone very, very in depth, but we don't have 3 hours. So this was a summary of the yoga of discriminative discernment. And with that, now I will signal to everyone that if you have any questions, either about anything that we discussed today or about any aspect specifically of Sanatana Dharma, not any other religion, etc., not politics, not anything else, only Sanatana Dharma, I will be very happy to entertain your questions. Very good. Very nice. Some very good questions coming in right now. There's a little 20-second delay, so I had to wait for the questions to come in. Here is a very interesting question from Om Namo Narayanaya. And the question is, Namaste Acharyaji, is there a different Shiva in every universe, just as there is a different Brahma, or is Shiva a unique being? Very nice. And first, let me give you the true but yet somewhat humorous answer, but then I'll go in depth and give you what is the actual answer. The answer is yes and no. That's the humorous answer, but yet true nonetheless. And the reason why it is indeed yes and no is that ultimately, when it comes to Shiva in and of himself, there is indeed only one Shiva. Indeed, that Shiva transcends any given material universe, including this material universe. That is a Shiva that is located in Shiva Loka in the Virat ocean, that is outside of the material world itself, but not quite in the spiritual realm. So thus, that ultimate Shiva is a being that transcends any one particular material universe, because he is outside of this material universe, on the one hand. On the other hand, there are indeed expansions of Shiva within every single universe. So this is how I can say that yes and no, that both are true. That ultimately there is indeed one Shiva who transcends any given material universe, but at the same time, there is an expansion of Shiva within every universe, and in fact, several expansions. We're not going to go into all of them, but for example, every single universe has to go through this threefold process of creation, sustenance, being sustained, and then ultimately destruction. So thus there is a Shiva in every universe that is responsible for that destructive element, destroying the universe, the dissolution of the universe. There are expansions of Shiva as Rudras, so who are thus responsible for storms, etc. So there are expansions of Shiva within each given universe, but ultimately Shiva in and of himself is a being who transcends any given material universe. So ultimately, yes, there's one Shiva. So I hope that answers the question. We can go much deeper, but then it gets to be too long and very, very metaphysical, but hopefully that suffices. Very good. Philip Lind asks, is there any specific literature one could read to learn about the decline of wisdom, that is, the way that we lost our connection and record of times when humans were more connected to higher values? Yes, indeed. A very good question, actually. And there is indeed, this is known as the Puranas. And actually, let me go a little bit deeper. There's actually quite a few works that talk about this. Mahabharata talks about this very in depth, actually. If you read the Mahabharata, and you don't need to read the entire Mahabharata, there are smaller summary studies. Kamala Subramaniam is one person who wrote a very, very well-known and very well-written, actually, summary study of the Mahabharata, and even that's about 900 pages. So when I say summary study, the Mahabharata in translation, in English translation, is approximately 12 volumes. It's a very long work, actually. But you can read either the summary, or you can read all 12 volumes. And there are several sections in which, again, the intellectual decline of humanity, the philosophical decline of humanity, the virtue decline of humanity, etc., are all discussed in Mahabharata. This is also discussed in all of the Puranas as well, where pretty much to my memory, and I've read all the Puranas, to my memory, they all speak about the Kali Yuga, they speak about the decline of ages, etc. I don't believe there's any Purana that does not discuss this. For quick and easy access, you can very specifically look at the Bhagavata Purana, what's known as Srimad Bhagavatam. So indeed, there is quite a bit of literature that talks about the history of decline of humanity. Here is a very good question that actually has to do with what we talked about today, and this is, what is the difference between Buddhi and Manas? Excellent question. Very, very good question, actually. And let me explain this. I kind of have to explain it a little bit in depth, but it shouldn't take very long. First of all, let's deal with it the other way around. First of all, Manas. Manas itself means mind, and mind in the very much material sense. You see, this is a very interesting juxtaposition of Vedic philosophy versus, I don't want to say all because it's not the case, but much of Western philosophy, is that when it comes to the idea of mind, mind tends to be a very, very general, very confused, very misunderstood category within Western philosophy, where they'll even use mind to mean soul. They'll use it to mean many, many, many different things. And the truth of the matter is, from the Vedic perspective, mind itself, very simply, is that aspect, that subtle aspect of the psyche that is the storehouse of information. That is mind. That is something material. It's something that's temporary. We all have a mind in this sense, meaning, again, that storehouse of information, of data, of sense impressions from the past. And it's from that we then grab that data, and then the intellect uses it to order all of that data. That's intellect versus mind. So that's what mind is. It is the storehouse of information that each of us as individuals have. And that being the case, again, it's material. Now, when it comes to this other word, buddhi, this sometimes confuses people. It shouldn't. Because like with many Sanskrit words, most Sanskrit words have multiple meanings, and you have to understand what is the specific meaning in accordance with the context of the literature in which you're reading that term. So buddhi has two primary meanings. The first of these is buddhi, meaning intellect, that is material intellect. That is, again, this second factor that I was speaking about just a minute ago, where we have all that data, all the information, memories, sense impressions, knowledge that we've acquired, that we've accumulated, etc., within that manas, that mind, that storehouse of information. But now there is intellect, and that is the ordering principle. It is intellect that uses all the various tools of intellect, such as logic, mathematics, etc., to now, and discriminative discernment, to now take all of that data and make sense of it by categorizing it, by indeed seeing distinctions, by seeing similarities, by ordering in accordance with quantitative and qualitative hierarchy, etc. That is intellect in accordance with yoga psychology very specifically. Now, Buddhi, again, has several different meanings. The first one is material intellect, which, again, this is something material. But Buddhi also means something else. It also means wisdom faculty. Now, in this secondary term of wisdom faculty, what wisdom faculty, Buddhi as wisdom faculty, what this is something that is an inherent attribute of Atman itself. That is, that ability to grasp and fully implement eternal wisdom. That is something that is beyond mere intellect. Intellect tends to be factually oriented, whereas Buddhi, as far as wisdom faculty, indeed tends to be eternal wisdom oriented, if you can understand that subtle yet crucial distinction that's there. So thus, Buddhi in this second sense of wisdom faculty is an aspect of soul. It is a power of our soul that is always there. So thus, our goal is indeed to acquire access to our Buddhi, to our wisdom faculty in such a way that we have now accessed this Atmic tool for grasping, understanding, and fully implementing true and eternal wisdom in our lives. So this is something that is spiritual. So I hope that answers the question as briefly as I could answer it. Here's a very nice question. Namaste Acharya-ji, how can we best help others within the system of Sanatana Dharma? Very nice. So within the system of Sanatana Dharma, of course, you might mean two things. You might mean how to help people who are followers of Sanatana Dharma, or you might mean how to help people using Sanatana Dharma. And I'm going to go with the latter, and truthfully, the latter applies to both anyway, because this is how you would help people whether they are followers of Sanatana Dharma or not. The very best way that you can help people, let's say, using Sanatana Dharma in a dharmic way, is indeed to help to awaken people, is to help to give people knowledge of Sanatana Dharma as much as is within your capability as an individual, as you, as a personality. And what this means is everything from, if you are an individual who has a tremendous amount of knowledge and, more importantly, experience in Sanatana Dharma, this means teaching others as much as you can. Doesn't mean becoming a guru. You don't do that unless you are a self-realized being, unless you truly are a Jivan Mukta, someone who is within the material world yet liberated. No, you don't pretend that you're a guru, but you teach people, again, to the greatest ability that you have, to the best of your present capacity. And if you don't feel that you're even in that position yet, that you can gently teach people little aspects of Sanatana Dharma, then at the very least, help to awaken others by giving them access to information about Sanatana Dharma. What does that mean? Well, very specifically and bluntly, the most important force for restoring Sanatana Dharma upon the face of the earth today, bar none, is a movement known as the International Sanatana Dharma Society. We are awakening millions of individuals to Dharma, to truth, to self-realization, to God consciousness, etc. Help us to help others. And what does that mean? How can you do that regardless of who you are and where you are? At the very least, if you are on any social media, for example, spread our links. Spread links to our videos everywhere that you can. You know, I'm not going to give the long list of social media, but anywhere, Facebook, Twitter, Gab, Telegram, any place you are, Odyssey, any place, any social media where you are, please spread the links to everything that we have, all of our videos, to all of our platforms, to all of our books, to our primary website, dharmacentral.com. It means encourage people as much as possible to come to this live stream. Encourage people whenever you know. We do this every single Monday at 7 p.m. Encourage people to come to this live stream. Just tell them, hey, if you're sincerely interested in spirituality, this is something you have to experience. And just give them the URL. Tell your friends. Tell anyone you can. etc. And in this way, you yourself will be doing your part to awaken people spiritually. This is how you can help people in the most important of ways. Very good. Please give me a moment. I'm just looking through all these many, many questions. Here's a very nice question, actually, that I will indeed answer. And the question is from Chad Martin. Thank you for the wonderful lecture, Guruji. Absolutely my pleasure. In attaining moksha, does the atman take memory with it? Names, identities, memory of past lives, etc. Excellent question, actually. And the answer is quite simple and quite clear, actually. It's not a matter of speculation. Indeed, the atman does. The reason why this is the case is because upon liberation, the atman now has full access to knowledge. Full access to knowledge in generally, again, having access to Buddhi, to this wisdom faculty. The atman now has access to all knowledge, including most especially, of course, knowledge about itself. So at that point, yes, all memory is awoken, all memory of, yes, every single past life, everything that there is to know about oneself, etc. Now, all that being said, while this may seem like a fascinating moment to some people, that moment of liberation where now suddenly you remember all your past lives, you see, even in general, when thinking about the concept of memory, there are some things, even within our present memory, that are of so little importance that we really take no regard of them. You know, that we chewed gum once in a movie theater in 1989 watching X movie. Now, do we have that memory? Yeah, we may not, but who cares? It's not really that important. In the same way, interestingly, while upon liberation, the atman does indeed now have access to information about all the previous lives that are there, for the atman, it's not a big deal. For the atman, as a liberated being, is not really thrilled by that knowledge. It's simply knowledge, and they are completely detached from this knowledge. It's simply knowledge that they have. They're not thrilled by it, etc. But yes, you do indeed have memory of everything at that point. Please give me a moment. We have 1 minute, so I just wanted to see if we have a question that I can answer in a minute. So just give me a moment, please. I see some very deep philosophical questions here that I maybe cannot answer in just a minute. Let's see. Maybe I'll just take this one question. And this is from Amarsh Gautam, and I see you've asked about 79 questions here. I'm exaggerating a little bit. They're all very good questions, actually, but I apologize. There's no way I'll be able to answer all of your questions in 1 minute. So at the very least, let me look at the very first one. And you say, Hare Krishna, I'm born Hindu from India, Acharyaji. I am in search of true God. I chant Hare Krishna as told by Prabhupada. So is it same as chanting Narayana? Very, very nice question. And I've answered similar questions in the past. Let me just say, when it comes to being Vaishnava, and we are Vaishnava, you know, I am a Vaishnava, I have been a Vaishnava all of my existence. And when it comes to being a Vaishnava, it's not necessary to make any sort of, let's say, worthless sectarian sort of things like this, where, oh, I am this sampradaya versus that sampradaya. We are Vaishnava. We want to know Krishna. We want to know Sriman Narayana. That is the important thing. So personally, I try to downplay the difference between various Vaishnava sampradayas, Vaishnava paramparas, etc., as long as they are legitimate, as long as it's not something that's just made up. And when it comes to the Hare Krishna mantra versus the Narayana mantra, both are good in that both contain the names of God. So if you are chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, absolutely wonderful that you are doing this. I have never purposefully dissuaded people from chanting the Hare Krishna mantra if that is what they are doing and that is what they wish to do. At the same time, the Om Namo Narayana mantra also is indeed a truly Vedic mantra that is revealed in the Upanishads, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, all throughout the Vedic scriptures, and in too many places to even list. It is a mantra that is taught by the Alvars, who every Vaishnava, regardless of Sampradaya, all accept as the most exalted Vaishnavas in history, the 12 Alvars. This is a mantra that indeed was taught by Sri Ramanuja Acharya, who again, all Vaishnavas accept, etc., etc. So I would just say, if you are happy with the Hare Krishna mantra, please continue to chant the Hare Krishna mantra and do your best to be a sincere devotee of Bhagavan Sri Krishna. If you wish to begin reciting the Om Namo Narayanaya mantra, then please feel free to do that too. And either way, you are reciting the sacred names of God, and that is the thing that is of importance. So with that, we are a little bit over time, so I'm going to stop here. Again, with this talk, I know that I threw quite a bit at people. With many of my talks, they are really talks that should be 3 hours long that I try to do in about 35 or 40 minutes. Again, you get information here that you do not get on any other YouTube channel or any other channel on any platform whatsoever in existence and live, which is especially astounding. And that being the case, that leads perfectly into what I'm about to say, and that is, if you have not already done so, please subscribe to this very special channel. This channel is, again, not like any other channel. You are gifted with this channel with information about Sanatana Dharma that is as authentic, as legitimate, as true, as pure as exists within our current era upon the face of the earth. So please subscribe when you can. Please like this video. Don't forget to do that, because that helps with the algorithms. The more likes we get, then the more this video is suggested so that people can see it, and they also will derive benefit from this video. Again, when you have a chance, please get our latest book, Introduction to Sanatana Dharma. Our other books are also available on dharmacentral.com. We have many of our books there: Sanatana Dharma, The Eternal Natural Way, the Sanatana Dharma Study Guide, The Vedic Way of Knowing God, Living Dharma, The Shakti Principle, etc., etc. All of our books are available there. When you find yourself there on dharmacentral.com, also please join our email list. And that way, just in case anything happens with any social media platform, anyone can lose these platforms at any moment. The internet is a very, very unstable thing, more so than people understand. In this way, if you join our email list, we can hopefully keep in touch. And the other thing I want to finally mention is what I always mention. That is, if you are a serious follower of Sanatana Dharma, if you are someone who has benefited from these weekly live streams, from the books, from all the activities that we do, and there are many, many activities. If you have benefited in any way, please help our movement, the International Sanatana Dharma Society, by either making a one-time donation of anything that you can, or even better, by becoming a member of the ISDS. Again, if you go to dharmacentral.com, if you look on the menu, you'll see membership. And if you go there, you can become a member of the ISDS. And in that way, you tithe something every month. It can be as little as $5 or $10. It can be 100 million. It can be anything in between. There is no limit to how small or how big you can tithe every single month. And in that way, you will be helping us with all of our many, many dozens of activities that we do throughout the world to restore Dharma. And also you yourself will have this wonderful feeling of being connected to the ISDS and to what we are doing. You will have this wonderful feeling of knowing that you are helping, that you are part of our family, and truly helping us in every way to bring Dharma to the world. With that, I thank you all very much again for being here. Please join us again next Monday at 7 p.m. for our next live stream satsangha and Q&A session. And with that, Namaste. Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. International Sanatana Dharma Society Jayate. Vedic Heartland Initiative Jayate. Om Hri Om. And with that, everyone, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you very much for being here. Please join us again next time. And in the meantime, please take very good care of yourselves in every way.